Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, we are back for another episode in this podcast where I get the opportunity to talk with some very interesting accessibility practitioners. And today I am speaking with Charlie Turrell. Hello, Charlie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's great to be able to chat with you. It, for me, is early in the morning. A fairly nice day on Vashon Island, which is near Blink's headquarters office in Seattle, Washington. Where are you talking to us from?
So I'm in Salford in Manchester in the UK, and it's a bit overcast, which is general for the UK. And I'm actually in the BBC offices in Media City. So there's three of us here, and that's why we film like BBC Sport and the Breakfast Show and things like that. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
All right. Well, Manchester is a great city. I visited there a couple of times and enjoyed it very much. And thanks for being part of this. You mentioned being at the BBC today. So a good place to start if you could just talk about the types of things that you're currently involved with.
Yeah, fab. So I am the Accessibility Champions Manager. So I look after a network of people that try and put accessibility at the forefront of everything that they do. Generally, they're made up of designers and developers, but we also have a couple in the legal team, a couple in the diversity and inclusion area, and some journalists and things too. So generally what I do is I onboard those people. I get them involved in accessibility in all manner of different ways, whether it comes to social, whether it's doing some training, whether it's just getting to know each other or doing some problem solving. And generally that takes up a big part of my day. Other areas is kind of a bit of strategy work. We look at the training and see if we can develop some things. We do bits of socials, so kind of bringing in external people, anything new that we think might be exciting, getting people involved in some meetups. And on the other side of it, kind of going to senior leaders and making sure that we're ahead of everything when it comes to what's new and accessibility and the projects that are coming our way, and making sure that we're as prepared as possible to kind of help people with whatever it is that they need to do in regards to that kind of strategy.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly aware of your organization. I'm not exactly aware of like how large it is, but it sounds like from what you've been talking about that you're involved in kind of an overarching accessibility support across the organization. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the BBC, we've got about, I think it's about 35,000 people at work, and that is from the last time I remember someone else telling me that. And we're in various different locations. I generally look after anything that is digital and public facing. So anything that we put out there in BBC iPlayer, sounds, news, weather, anything like that, any of the products that we have, generally anything that goes out for the public, we want to make sure that's as accessible as possible, making sure that everyone can access that content. So the Champions Network has been quite flexible, but it's kind of sat around the 250 mark. Those champions are literally everywhere. And I think that it's good for us, especially that I'm in a very small team in the user experience and design area. And there's only three of us currently. So there's me and there's Becky, who does a lot of the training. And then there's Jamie Knight, who people might recognize the name of, that he does a lot of he's a subject matter expert. He's the brains of all of our team. So because we're so small, it makes it quite difficult for us to be across everything and know what's coming. So having these champions, it just almost means that we've got this extra large team of people, so they can kind of go, hey, you know, we're working on something, we need a little bit of help here, or, oh, did you know this is something that's really cool that we've created, we can celebrate it and tell the rest of the BBC. So generally, you know, even though we're quite small in our little corner of the world, it means that we actually have this massive reach everywhere to try and kind of make all our output as accessible as possible.
Well, I definitely want to come back and to talk about the champions a bit more and get more info about that. But one of the things I like to do with this podcast is find out how people first found their way into accessibility, because it tends to be something that we don't necessarily, for at least most of us right now, study in our foundation courses at university and things. And so let's find out how you guys found your way into it. Where did it be first? Where did you first become aware of it?
Well, do you know what? It's mad you say that, actually, because I think a lot of people, when I have conversations of how they got into accessibility, it's always by accident. And that was kind of what happened for me as well. So I first came to the BBC. I'd done lots of different jobs. I'd kind of flitted around from finance to insurance to working with young people at a youth centre. Couldn't quite figure out where I fit. And I was at the youth centre for quite a while, and I loved the morals there and the fact that we were doing things in a underprivileged area. And I thought, you know, we're making a difference in the community, but the reach just wasn't far enough for me. So I remember looking at a post at the BBC for a PA role. And on the back of the post was all these kind of morals, and the kind of the BBC holds itself to quite a high standard, and we want to make sure that everything is equal, kind of equal rights for people. And it was very like, yeah, I could understand being in an organisation where the reach is massive and we're all trying to do the right thing. So I applied for that role. I was a PA for a while. I ended up being a PA for 6 or 7 different people across the organisation. Really got to understand how each area has a massively different culture. You know, everybody saw things from a completely different view, but they were doing it in different ways. And I could kind of see, oh, where would I like to kind of move around to? The area that I had the most interactions with was user experience and design. And it was a guy called Colin who I was PAing for at the time. And under him was the heads of design. And one of them was Gareth Ford Williams, who people know generally is quite, you know, is quite well known in the accessibility industry. Absolute character. We got on straight away. And the more he was so passionate about accessibility, about explaining what it is that he does and why it's so important, I just couldn't get enough. I was listening to all these different things, all these different stories that he had, the fact that he had such drive, and he made it so much fun, you know, all these different ways that he was doing things, and the passion behind it kind of is infectious almost. He said that, you know, we've got a champions network. I immediately wanted to get involved in that. And I said, how can I be a champion? You know, is it anything that I can do in my emails that make things more accessible? You know, with PDFs are a bit of a sore spot. Can I get involved in that? And actually, I love the culture and I love people. I really do. Like anything that will make people's lives easier, if they can help in any way, I absolutely will. And I also don't really care about like a hierarchy. I will talk to anybody regardless of where they are in the BBC with the same amount of respect, which I think people should do in general. Spoke to him and he said, actually, you know, there's going to be a position available for somebody to look after the Champions Network because the person that's doing that is moving on. And I thought, yeah, absolutely. That is perfect for me. Went for the interviews and I've never been so excited for a role before. Obviously was successful and started to take over and learn about, you know, how the network was really structured and how people could get involved. And I just had this world of knowledge that I had never been exposed to before about the lenses that we use in accessibility. And that excitement just grew and grew. And I got to know more people across the business, work with an incredible team of some of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met. And the other side of it was such a neurodiverse team that I felt so much more comfortable. I have ADHD and I didn't realize I was masking a lot of, you know, different ways. And I was kind of trying to cope with this very structured way of doing things. And I got to be in this environment where my needs were taken in consideration. We openly spoke about what we would need and want, and we could all work in whatever way suited us. I started to work with Jamie. I'd never worked with somebody like Jamie before, and I got to understand all his nuances and the ways that we like to interact, and it was so honest and wonderful. And I think that ignited my love of accessibility, and I think it's just continued from there. The more I've got into it and the more that I've spoken to people and met other people equally as passionate, I just don't think that feeling ever goes away.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing the part about your own physical challenges that you kind of got greater awareness of through your work. You know, when we come into accessibility. One of the things we do have is a huge body of knowledge available about it, but that can also be overwhelming for people that just start to come into that area. So how did you start to process that? Obviously, as your role, you're helping others to find that information, but what was your experience in feeling like you knew what was going on?
I think at the very beginning, I did feel incredibly overwhelmed. And I was like, with accessibility, it's constantly changing and there's new things that are happening all the time. People are designing new things and creating new things. I really didn't know where to start with my learning. There's no kind of set process, is there? You don't do a level, and, accessibility is just knowledge and you experience things and learn as you go. So I took that overwhelmed feeling and used that for the new champions that were coming in. So instead of trying to pretend that I had it all together and I knew about different things, I used that and kind of said, you're joining this Accessibility Champions Network. I'm learning, and this is how I felt when I first took over. And I presume that's how you would feel. So let's do that together. Let's do bits of learning together and get involved. And I think knowing that, I scaled back our onboarding. It used to be quite complicated, and I think it worked really well for the person that was running it in the past, but I didn't have that technical knowledge that person did, so I felt a little bit out of my depth. So instead I focused on the individual and said, so what is it that motivates you? Why you want to become a champion? How do you like to learn? Is there any different ways that I can adapt the training and the sessions that work for you? Do you want to be working where we do it together? Do you want to be able to go away and read some different things? Are there any needs that you have that we need to kind of adjust for? And that became a much more calm way of learning, the least kind of less pressure, I think, to be able to do that. Also, one of the biggest things that I would say to anybody, if you're coming into this community, make as many friends as you possibly can. There are people all over the globe that have wonderful skills, that have a bunch of knowledge, and I can tell you now, they will share everything with you. There's no gatekeeping, I feel, in accessibility. I think everybody just wants to make sure that they are sharing their knowledge. So Gareth, he knows everybody, and it was wonderful. So he introduced me to a few different people and said, go and speak to them, just go and ask them a load of questions, and you don't have to know anything. There's no silly questions, just go and find out. There's no judgment here. And so I went out there and started to make new friends and new people. And from that, some people were telling me loads of different things that they do with their champions that really worked for them. And I just said, all right, I'll give it a go. And so we have a mentality with the champions and in our team of everything's an experiment. It's we're going to try it. If it doesn't work, we'll learn from it. And if it does, that's wonderful. So I think kind of scaling back the pressure and knowing that you won't know everything and admitting that actually breeds this kind of really comfortable learning environment for people to get involved in, because they don't feel like they have to dive straight into the deep end. We can do it bit by bit, and we can do it together.
Well, a number of times you've talked about the champions that you work with. Why don't you give us a little bit more of a introduction to what that's about? There are other organizations that have used that term in different ways. How does it work at the BBC? If I wanted to be a champion, what would I have to learn and be responsible for, and how am I helping move things forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So with being in the Champions Network, what we say right at the very beginning is a champion is just somebody that puts their hand up in a sprint or in a meeting or whenever someone's talking about designing or building something and just says, have we thought about accessibility? Here are some resources to help us. So that is the bare minimum, the minimum kind of requirement to be a champion. And if that's all you ever do, and you find it difficult to kind of have time to learn or anything like that, it's just knowing where to find the answer. So that's it. That is the start of Champions. If you want to build your knowledge, we have tons of ways to do that. So if you were to come to me and say, I'm really interested in being a champion, we'd say, right, wonderful. So let's have an onboarding chat. That is 20 minutes. If it wants to be longer and people get into it and want to chat, that's wonderful, but there's no pressure. I introduce myself and kind of my little bit of history and what I do. I give a brief kind of structure of the network, which is quite fluid, realistically. And then they talk to me about what they already know, what they would like to learn. I give them a few topics that they might not have thought about before. And then the ways and styles that they like to learn. So I can at least know that, you know, if you're interested in workshops and this is a kind of the way that they like to do things, they'll be the first people I'll tell them about a new workshop. And then we literally stop and kind of go, right, let's reflect on what we've already done. That's a good first step. We don't want to overwhelm you. Let's have another conversation in X amount of weeks. So after that, I send them links to a couple of resources and then a couple of fun videos where we talk about a user's experience or a day in the life of somebody, or, you know, kind of just giving them that little bit of a toe in the water for the accessibility community as a whole. And so doing it in these little tiny stages over a period of time helps keep the momentum up for that person. It doesn't feel overwhelming. So the resources that we have the mobile accessibility guidelines, the MAG, we have the gel tech documents that we use internally, and we have a huge page which is actually available to the public for loads of kind of resources for accessibility. So it's anything from understanding the lenses that we use when it comes to accessibility, right down to the step-by-step how to kind of use a screen reader, or, you know, how to do a lot of the technical stuff that I don't really understand, you know, these kind of how-to documents, and they're all there readily available for people. And I think having that like relationship with that person over a period of time, just getting to know them a little bit, introducing them to other champions. We have a Slack channel and a Microsoft Teams channel where people can just either post about events, they can post about some really cool things that they've done, or a lot of it is just questions of, I'm building this thing, I need to know how to use the correct something or other, and everyone starts to have a discussion about it and we find the correct way of doing it. Even if you're not posting the questions, they're there for you just to be able to go, oh, learn by doing, other people are doing. You can see the kind of conversation that they're having. You've learned something today. You know, that could just be a part of your training. We also have introduction to accessibility training. So we do that for a lot of designers to kind of make sure that we understand that it's barriers and environment rather than the medical model of disability, which is kind of, we tend to err away from that. We talk about everybody's, you know, no one's disabled until you start building something that disables that person, you know, so it's about your environment. It's really kind of, it's a great way of looking at it to make sure that you're including everybody in that discussion. We use a lot of examples actually, like, you know, if you're creating something and it might not be, you know, it can be your environment that makes it difficult to use that thing. So if you're on a mobile phone, you know, but you also have a child in one arm, or you're on the tube and you've got your hand to make sure you're not rocking, or your environment is quite rocky, you need to be able to use whatever it is on your phone, even though you've only got the one hand currently using it. So we talk a lot about different ways of doing things. So all of that kind of immerses you into this wonderful accessibility world. We start talking, introducing them to other people that are external, who are absolutely incredible when it comes to doing talks, or even just opening up some discussions on Twitter, and, you know, on LinkedIn is great as well. So it's kind of having all these various options for you to just start your journey and go at it in whatever pace that you would like, and also introducing you to people that have got the same level of culture and kind of a mentality as well. And it kind of makes you feel like, actually, yeah, if I don't know something, I've got somebody right there that I can go and ask a question, or I can find it, you know, somewhere else. So even as a champion, you can either continue with that learning, or you can just get involved in the community area of it and start just talking to people. It's absolutely up to you, however you want to do that, but it's making sure you're just part of it, you know, making sure you're just bringing it up whenever we're creating something, make everybody talk about it. It's not something we add on at the end. We talk about it at the beginning. We build it into everything that we do. We want to make sure this is inclusive and everybody gets the most out of whatever it is that you're doing.
Well, it's great to hear about the large repository of knowledge that you have available for all the training pieces that you have available to everybody. And with that, I'm sure that's always growing. One of the things about accessibility is it's pretty impossible to have it be covering everything, and we're always moving forward, doing better, adding information, and so I assume that's the same there. Are there any certain areas of the onboarding which you've found maybe more difficult than other parts for the champions that you work with, or are there certain areas where you want to work to be able to improve services?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, I notice my lack of technical knowledge sometimes when you've got somebody that is quite tech focused, and which is why I do honestly believe that if you've got a team of people, you need to have somebody there that is a technical person, who is kind of a developer, who has done that kind of thing, because I think some people really want to get into that nitty gritty, having debates about things, and I don't feel like I can always fulfill that. And I think sometimes, you know, you get a bit of imposter syndrome. I think everybody gets that at the best of times, but being able to have that group of people together that can all do it and work, and that is when you know that you've got a good team as well. So I think that part of it I find quite difficult sometimes. I think as well, you know, I try and change the network a little bit, just to kind of, you have to be flexible depending on what position the business is taking a little bit. So I think for a while we discussed about having levels of champions, or we had, you know, levels of learning, but having that open discussion with the rest of the champions and them kind of going, yeah, but that's not really how accessibility works for us, or, you know, there's no such thing as, almost like levels of a screen reader. You know, you learn about things, you learn how to interact with things, and then you talk to users and you just learn, don't you? You just continue to grow by doing. There's no actual kind of, you could do a university course in it. And so I think getting the mindset right for that, and knowing how to get people to be continuing to learn the next thing rather than it, you know, and having a little bit of structure around it can sometimes be quite difficult. But that's something that I'm currently working on at the minute. Instead of doing levels, I'm doing almost like a journey for people, you know, so they can kind of come in and they do a bit of onboarding, and then they join the Slack channel and they join other channels and they get on the D list for emails, they get the newsletters, and then you meet another champion and then you read the mobile accessibility guidelines, and there's this little kind of route that they can take that feels more like you developing into a community rather than kind of accessibility knowledge levels. So it took me a little while to kind of understand how that works as well, and to kind of trial out different things. But I will say that, you know, there's been a couple of events that I've done, some have gone really well, some haven't, you know, and I'm quite honest about the fact that sometimes I've thought a structure will work and then it just didn't. And all you can do from that is go, oh, I'll learn from it, I'll do something different, I'll find out why it didn't work, and, you know, why get champions involved and get them to tell you why it didn't work. I'm quite happy to have as much criticism as possible now, but that took a little while to get used to, you know. So I think they're the things that I find difficult in the role, but I think keeping an open mind and kind of going, it's not about me specifically, it's about making sure that we're teaching people as much as we can and we're getting them, you know, involved and happy about it. It's not a reflection on me, it's just my job to make sure that I'm kind of including as many people as possible, really.
And you mentioned at the very start, 35,000 employees, so definitely a large organization. Are there any certain job categories that you're responsible in working with, or is it or do the champions help out, you know, across the wide variety of activities people are involved with at the BBC?
It's a bit hit and miss, actually. I think the people that I tend to interact with quite a lot are anybody that works in product. So yeah, you know, the kind of the product leaders, a lot of the designers, so the UX and D, so the user experience and design area, they're my two kind of main focuses, I would say. And I think that's because they're at the forefront of all of our output. The rest of the business, it's very different. You know, my kind of presentations will really change depending on who it is that I'm speaking to. You know, I've got one on Wednesday and I'm talking to the diversity and inclusion group that is on the other side of kind of the business, really. It's something that I don't actually interact with that much, but their lenses are a little bit off when it comes to disability. They're thinking of it purely from a medical model. And we just want to kind of go, actually, can we make sure that we're all on the same baseline level? Let's like make sure we're all on the same headspace. You don't have to learn a load of stuff, but let's kind of think about it. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet at the very beginning. And so I get to interact with these kind of different smaller groups of people, which is great because I learned something from them as well. You know, the presentation that I might do might need tweaking a little bit. So I get to be able to understand my audience a little bit better. I think the area that I find difficult is we have a world service with BBC Studios, because they're not a public So we're with license fee payers, and they actually, I mean, we don't have any adverts or anything like that, whereas they're more kind of commercial entity. It can be a little bit difficult because we have policies and guidelines in the charter, which is really good for us actually, because we've got a really kind of something to reference. We don't like to use it, but we've got something to reference to kind of go, we do have to do this thing. It's a legal requirement, but it is a little bit different for that area. So sometimes I have to kind of go along the, well, this is worthwhile from also a financial point of view, not having to redesign, not getting sued, you know, all these different things. That's not really the lens that I like to use and the one that I have to take. But in a very high pressured environment, sometimes you really do have to be flexible and adjust, you know, your argument slightly, you know. And I think sometimes senior leadership, because they're not directly involved in the creating of the products, they kind of think that, oh, it's accessibility, somebody else will do it. And sometimes you kind of have to go, actually, you know, if you're using the right language, your staff and the people that are working with you are using the right language, we're all thinking about it, you're just really going to avoid any kind of slip ups. So that's something that, you know, our team have been working on, doing a little bit of a PR almost, going to different areas and kind of making sure everyone's got the right mindset. So I think as a larger business, that's always going to happen. And I think it doesn't matter any business, getting senior leadership buy-in is always difficult, especially if you're wanting to start a champions network. But being able to kind of go, well, for us, we went from all these kind of complaints and redesigns and time wasting things by doing audits, and actually getting to a point where everyone talks about accessibility constantly and we're not having to do that kind of problem. You know, there is a real business case for that. And if everybody's interested in starting up champs networks, you know, there's I run a Champions of Accessibility network external to the BBC, and we can find us on LinkedIn. It's under CAN, and it's great because it means all these different groups of people that have either started a champs network or run a champs network in these businesses. And believe me, the models are vastly different to mine. You know, ours works for us quite specifically, but some people working in finance and some people working in e-commerce and various different areas, and they have to structure theirs around the needs of their business as well. So there is different ways of doing things, and I think looking into that and always being willing to change is something that I need to constantly remind myself of as well.
Well, Charlie, it's been very informative to hear about how the BBC is doing things and the Champions Network, and also your own, you know, personal introduction and growth in this area. So thank you very much for contributing your ideas.
No, thank you. Honestly, it's been lovely. And as you can tell, I love talking about anything accessibility. It's great. And the more people we can reach and talk about it and kind of get everyone on the same mindset is wonderful. So thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, hopefully if maybe we'll get back to Manchester, we can meet for a coffee or a pint or something.
Absolutely. You are always welcome.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.